Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, Leading a Culture of Compliance, Integrating Ethical Behaviors Throughout the Organization. Glad to have you with us today. A few webinar reminders before we get started. Our purpose today is to share knowledge regarding compliance trending, non-compliance impact, compliance culture responsibility, and a compliance culture framework for leaders to form high-performance teams. Regarding your questions, write your questions in the Q&A section. Our goal is always to answer these at the close of the presentation. If we don't get to all those, we'll follow up via email. Yes, the materials are available to you. The entire webinar is being recorded. You'll receive a link that will also include the ability to view and download the presentation deck. For those of you joining us today with your International Board Director Competency Designation, you will receive 1 CPE credit by attending. Just be sure to follow the proper CPE credit submission guidelines. Thank you. Let me welcome our guest speaker for today, Shelly Gallup. Shelly, so glad to have you with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
We're looking forward to your discussion today as well. Shelly is the owner of S. Gallup Consulting, a regulatory affairs consulting agency providing regulatory strategy and compliance advisory services. She is also the co-director of educational programs for Orange County Regulatory Affairs Discussion Group with focus on medical devices. Shelly is also currently the Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Quality Assurance for Prismatic Dental Craft, Glidewell Dental. And I'm happy to say also, Shelly, that you are a fairly recent graduate of the International Board Director Competency Designation, and you hold that certification. Good for you. Welcome once again.
Thank you.
All right. Quick intro of me. For those that don't know me, I'm Mark Pfister. I'm a governance and strategy expert. I've published a book on the architecture of boards, the modern architecture behind an effective board of directors. And I'm also the creator of the International Board Director Competency Designation, a globally recognized board director education and certification program. Shelly, welcome so much. There's been a lot of hype around this. People are excited to hear what you have to say. Let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen so you can go ahead and do so. And the stage is yours. Thank you so much for joining us, Shelly.
Hello, everyone. I am excited to talk about what it means to lead a culture of compliance. My hope is that you will come to see that compliance is a part of every type of industry and how non-compliance can impact a business as a whole. As you can see, we will talk about compliance trending, non-compliance impact, compliance culture responsibility, compliance culture framework, and finally, we will go over the summary points. Starting with compliance trending, we will talk about what is a culture of compliance. Is the requirement for compliance in different businesses increasing or decreasing in 2025? So what is a culture of compliance? It is a behavior in the workplace that aligns with the external laws, internal policies, and increasingly ethical behaviors. According to the current trends, culture of compliance issues are expected to be on the rise in 2025 due to evolving technology and increased regulatory scrutiny. We will go into some of the areas of concern, but keep in mind that this list is not all inclusive. Starting with compliance trending, artificial intelligence regulation will intensify, and the EU AI Act will be leading the charge by categorizing AI systems by risk level. The Federal Trade Commission is also planning to expand AI fairness and transparency oversight. So, how is AI going to impact jobs? How many of you are concerned that AI will make you irrelevant? Will it impact human creativity? AI can reduce the need for original thinking and can stifle diversity in creative outputs. How will gathering personal data to feed algorithms impact privacy in the digital age? We all know that our phones are listening to us, right? And how about the impact of AI in the medical field and the potential to improve or possibly save lives? I think about how a chip implanted in the brain of patients that are paralyzed will help them to walk again, or a chip is implanted along with a mechanical eye to help the blind see again. Considering all of the potential impact and with the new regulatory compliance expectation, companies will be expected to incorporate bias detection and explainability, model documentation, and human oversight. Therefore, organizations should build robust AI governance frameworks that define ethical principles and regulatory adherence. There are many regulations and bills related to cryptocurrency that were created in 2024. There is the Bitcoin Act of 2024. There are some state legislations, the UK government bill, and all of the SEC regulations. Gary Gensler gave his resignation and stepped down as the chair of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which became effective this week on January 20th. Gensler believes in more regulation, saying that the crypto market is rife with fraud and manipulation. Last month, it was reported that Trump had nominated Paul Atkins to replace Gensler as the chair of the SEC. Opposite to Gensler, Atkins has previously testified in front of Congress about the benefits of reducing regulations on crypto. Considering all the expected changes in 2025, there is a lot of speculation as to what will happen in the crypto market under a new administration. You may have heard Trump calling himself the crypto president even prior to the election, but the common belief was that crypto markets would be looking at a friendlier regulatory environment with a new administration, regardless of who won the election. With all of that being said, with the new administration, there will be a new regulatory framework, which is expected to provide more clarity around cryptocurrency. And there will also be deregulation, where it is expected that investors will have to accept more risk. Security leaders can expect an increase in regulatory scrutiny around the world as governments respond to the swelling tide of cyber threats in 2025. There will be growing frequency and sophistication of cyber attacks, which impacts data privacy and brings about security concerns, which prompts the need for reassessment of existing regulatory frameworks. As a result, governments are likely to tighten regulations, which leads to stricter compliance standards and creating more severe enforcement to ensure that cybersecurity is prioritized within organizations. This is a pivotal year for environment, social governance, and its sustainability. Issues will continue to evolve. There will be new regulatory frameworks with new laws coming into play. There will be increasing litigation areas such as soil and water contamination, carbon and gas emissions, workplace DEI, salary expectations and fairness, safe and monitored facilities, labor standards, diversity within the board of directors, and so much more. ESG has a huge impact on how a company is viewed publicly and personally. There will be heightened scrutiny from investors and stakeholders to ensure that the company's board of directors, the CEO, the senior leadership, and its employees are becoming more aware that they need to be viewed in a positive light. With ESG, there is also an increased emphasis on transparency and accountability across industries. This year will be the beginning of a new era of efficiency and transparency as supply chain compliance is expected to increase, and the adoption of breakthrough technologies will be a key focus. Supply chain bottlenecks occur when one part of the chain supply slows down or the entire process comes to a halt, disrupting the flow of goods and services. Some of these bottlenecks are caused by shifts in consumer demand, which means consumers' expectations and preferences are continuously changing. There may be labor shortages. which have been a pressing issue in recent years, particularly in warehousing and distribution. In 2025, automation or robotics may alleviate some of the strain, but the human element will still be crucial, especially when there is a need for problem solving. There may be climate changes and environmental pressures, which are caused by extreme weather conditions. And environment regulations are pressuring companies to adopt sustainable practices. Finally, with geopolitical tensions and changing trade agreements, supply chains are constantly impacted by new tariffs, regulations, and compliance requirements. This may be a big one for 2025. An example that we have all experienced and can relate to was during COVID, when we saw the world shut down. There was severe disruption, and ever since, enterprises have been working to make their supply chains more resilient, sustainable, and collaborative with customers, suppliers, and other stakeholders. The sanctioned country is a country that has been designated by a government to have trade sanctions or embargoes imposed on it. With the new administration in 2025, we can expect tightened restrictions on Iran, Venezuela, and Cuba. And while we don't know what will happen with the Russia sanctions, there will likely be a potential to enforce and then adjust. Sanctions can be imposed for anti terrorism, non proliferation, narcotics trafficking, human rights violations, war crimes, and abusing diplomatic relations. Businesses operating in or near any of the sanctioned jurisdictions or in the affected sectors will face a need in 2025 to closely monitor regulatory developments and update compliance frameworks to adapt to the new environment. U.S. regulators are warning bankers about intensified focus being put on financial crime. In 2025, the government will continue to beef up efforts to fight money laundering and enforce know your customer rules. With Trump's presidential election victory, banking experts were focused on his leadership picks and plans for deregulation. However, banking regulators are saying that a change in presidential administration will not change their approach to financial crime, and it will remain a bipartisan focus. So, what does noncompliance look like? We will talk about past failures where I will give some examples of companies that found themselves in some trouble. The examples that I'm going to give may sound a little scary because they are, but my intent is not to scare you. It is to emphasize how noncompliance can really hurt a business and the recovery can be long term. After giving the examples, we will then dive deeper into the impact to business, where we will go into some of the benefits, but even more of the risks associated with new regulations and requirements and the failure to comply. So, some of the past failures. In October of 2024, Canadian lender TD Bank NA and its parent company, TD Bank US Holding Company, committed financial crimes and pled guilty to conspiring to fail to maintain an anti money laundering program that complies with the Bank Secrecy Act. They also failed to file accurate currency transaction reports and they laundered money. They paid approximately $3.08 billion in penalties. The Attorney General, Merrick B. Garland, stated, by making its services convenient for criminals, TD Bank became one. TD Bank became the largest bank in the U.S. history to plead guilty to the Bank Secrecy Act program and the first U.S. bank in history to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit money laundering. TD Bank chose profits over compliance with the law. When you think of TD Bank, consider the damage to their reputation. Consider the trust with shareholders and stakeholders that was broken. And also consider the financial cost of noncompliance. Also, In October 2024, the Securities and Exchange Commission charged Chicago-based Cumberland DRW with cryptocurrency violations by operating as an unregistered dealer in more than $2 billion of crypto assets offered and sold as securities. The company was in violation of the regulation requirements of the federal securities laws that are designed to protect investors. And the sex complaint charged Cumberland with violating the Securities Exchange Act, seeking permanent injunctive relief, disgorgement of ill-gotten gains, prejudgment interest, and civil penalties. So when you think of Cumberland DRW, consider the impact to shareholders and stakeholders, and also consider the financial costs of noncompliance. Here is an example of an ESG failure that many of you may remember or even been a part of. In 2016, Volkswagen was set to spend up to $14.7 billion to settle allegations of cheating emissions tests and deceiving customers on 2.0 liter diesel vehicles. This included two related settlements, one with the US and state of California and one with the US Federal Trade Commission. The Deputy Attorney General, Sally Q. Yates, stated that Volkswagen turned nearly 500,000 American drivers into unwitting accomplices in an unprecedented assault on the environment. Volkswagen paid $10 billion to buy back, terminate leases, or modify affected vehicles and compensate consumers. Then they had to pay an additional $4.7 billion to mitigate pollution and make investments that support zero emission vehicle technology. So now, when you think of Volkswagen, consider the reputational damage, the financial cost of noncompliance, the loss of trust with shareholders and stakeholders. And it's been almost 9 years, and I still don't think that they've recovered as of yet. Cybercrime laws criminalize unauthorized access, use, or alteration of personal data or ID systems. And data breaches are cybersecurity attacks that impact personal data and privacy. In a case in April of 2024, the most significant data privacy violation fined worldwide was for social media giant Meta. Meta was fined a record 1.2 billion euros, which is equivalent to 1.3 billion US dollars, in order to stop transferring data collected from Facebook users in Europe to the United States. So when you think of Meta, consider the loss of trust and the financial cost of non-compliance. In the early 2000s, long time ago, Boeing's production of 787 Dreamliner became part of a huge supply chain failure. Boeing outsourced areas of its business to meet their goals cheaply and quickly, but they outsourced core functions, leading to full reliance on over 50 suppliers. They had so many suppliers, there was no way for leadership to oversee what was going on. And that led to serious quality issues. Planes were grounded as lithium ion batteries were overheating and caused fires on board. And there was a very long delay to market. The first delivery was supposed to be made in 2008, and it didn't enter commercial service until 2011. So when you think of Boeing's 787 Dreamliner, consider the reputational damage, financial loss throughout the project, the loss of trust with shareholders and stakeholders, and the fear for human safety. And finally, medical device company Masimo had a failure that resulted in an FDA recall beginning in April 2024 for their Masimo Rad-G pulse oximeter. Masimo issued an urgent medical device recall notice for some of their medical devices powering off and on without pressing the power button. The issue can result in an unintentional change in the device's power state. Rad-G is a portable set pulse oximetry device that measures some vital parameters. The use of these measurements, according to Masimo, enables both spot checking and continuous monitoring to quickly assess patient condition. There were 2 patient deaths reported while being monitored with the RADG devices, but it was unknown whether the devices for those patients powered off unexpectedly. In August of 2024, additional recall notices were sent out identifying additional affected devices, which totaled 27,209 units that were impacted. So when you think of Massimo and their RADG device, consider the reputational damage. Nobody wants to have a recall. Consider the financial loss. Not only did they have to take back thousands of units, when there's a recall, typically the company would have to destroy them and then dump them into a landfill. What do you think that does to the environment? Here are the sources associated with the topics of the past failures. So now we'll talk about the impact to the business. There are benefits and risks to the increasing evolution of AI and the impact to individuals and business. So, what are the benefits? AI provides efficiency by automating tasks, increasing productivity, and identifying gaps. There is also a benefit with healthcare. AI helps analyze images for early detection, it creates predictive analytics, and it streamlines administrative tasks. There is a benefit with cybersecurity. AI helps by detecting, preventing, and responding to cyber threats. And with accessibility, AI provides image recognition, video transcription, smart home devices, and communication assistance. But with benefits, there is also risk. There is a risk of job loss. AI is likely to create job loss by automating repetitive tasks currently performed by humans. There is a lack of transparency. This could lead to unethical or biased outcomes, impacting fairness and potentially causing harm or discrimination. There is a risk to safety. There is a potential for unintended consequences arising from its decision making capabilities. And as we said, there's a risk of bias. AI can have serious bias for companies, individuals, and society. There's a risk to data privacy. There's a potential for AI systems to collect, analyze, and infer sensitive personal information from vast amounts of data without users fully understanding how their data is being used. And finally, there's a lack of accountability. There's no assigned responsibility to liable parties for bad outcomes, but the obvious direction to point the finger are to the developers. The U.S. Department of Justice and regulators have pursued enforcement actions against crypto exchanges, crypto trading, initial coin offerings, non-fungible tokens, stable coins, and more. Some of the areas of concern and or risk for a business is one, understanding blockchain technology, which is the underpinning of crypto-based activity, anti-money laundering procedures. There is a risk of failure to comply with AML requirements, retention policies, which are the bellwether of a company's compliance culture, and absence is indicative of wrongdoing. There is a risk to not doing third party due diligence. A company should always implement a risk based approach when engaging with third party providers. And finally, privacy and data security. There is a risk of data leaks, cyber hacks, phishing schemes, and bad actors. How do cybercrimes impact business? Well, let me tell you. Data breaches cost businesses an average of $4.88 million in 2024. Around 236.1 million ransomware attacks occurred globally in the first half of 2022. Around 1 in 10 US organizations have no insurance against cyber attacks. 53.35 million US citizens were affected by cybercrime in the first half of 2022. In 2020, Malware attacks increased by 358% compared to 2019. And still today, the most common cyber threat facing businesses and individuals is phishing. An example that I personally faced was in 2020, a couple of weeks after COVID hit and everyone was sent home. The company that I worked for faced a ransomware attack. The company refused to pay the ransom. So not only were we trying to figure out how to work completely remote as a company, we then suddenly had to completely shut down our computers until we could remedy the attack. We slowly started to get back email and then shared drives and then other applications. This caused a huge financial impact to the company. Investors of ESG reports consider a company's sustainability, societal impact, and governance practices before investing in them. As I said in a previous slide, the importance of ESG for both investors and consumers is on the rise, which is increasing the reputational and financial risks of getting it wrong. ESG information can be compiled in a couple of different ways. One is utilizing a company's internal teams, and another is by using an outside reporting agency. Looking at the three pillars of ESG, you can see some of the topics that are covered under each area and imagine what the potential impact could be to your business if your company is not in compliance. Supply chain compliance significantly impacts a business by ensuring adherence to legal and ethical standards throughout the entire supply chain. Ethical standards in supply chain management underline the importance of human rights, fair labor practices, and environmental sustainability. Businesses can ensure that their partners adhere to these ethical guidelines, which will foster a socially responsible supply chain. Legal standards in supply chain management require firms to comply with multiple national and international laws and regulations. These include trade compliance, anti-corruption laws, environmental regulations, and labor laws. Failure to comply with these legal requirements can result in several penalties, including fines, legal actions, and reputational damage. Addressing both ethical and legal standards is not only crucial for mitigating risks, it's also important for building trust with stakeholders, including customers, investors, and regulatory bodies. Ultimately, effective supply chain management compliance is essential for sustaining long-term success and fostering a positive corporate image. When it comes to sanctions, firms that lack governance, oversight, skills retention, resourcing, screening capabilities, customer due diligence, know your customer procedures, and breach reporting can be impacted economically. Sanctions disrupt the business sector by causing restricted market access, increased operational costs, supply chain disruptions, financial market volatility, loss of revenue, risk to the company's reputation, and an impact to innovation and R&D challenges. Impact from financial crimes includes financial losses, reputation damage, economic damage, and funding of further crimes, meaning proceeds from financial crimes can fund other illegal crimes, creating a cycle of crime. So now we will look at compliance culture responsibility. So who is responsible? Everyone in the company, and it needs to start from the top down and not the bottom up. Meaning, a culture of compliance needs to start with the board of directors and the CEO to set the tone. A compliance culture ensures safety, integrity, and ethical behavior across all organizational levels. So, what is the purpose? The purpose is to protect your business. Non-compliance costs money and could cost the company's reputation. not to mention personal liabilities such as money and prison time. And I always say, I don't look good in orange. The return on investment of a culture of compliance is significant. Compliance is a legal requirement that is crucial for success and sustainability in a competitive world where reputation is everything. So, how do you build and lead a culture of compliance? We will now talk about what a culture of compliance framework looks like. This is the slide that I would really like you to focus on. These are the 7 things that you need to understand to create a framework for a culture of compliance. First, set the tone from the top. As discussed, it is everyone's responsibility and it starts at the top, beginning with the board, CEO, the compliance officer, if there is one, senior leadership, managers, and all of the other employees. Leadership, beginning with the board and CEO, need to actively demonstrate their commitment to compliance through actions and communication. Number 2, get the employees involved. Prioritize clear communication and expectations, provide comprehensive training, open reporting channels, and allow for employee empowerment. Third, make the compliance team real and relevant. Bring to life your corporate ethics and values. By speaking out about your policies and processes and sharing real life stories, compliance leaders can make them relevant. Fourth, make compliance a positive. Those that don't have a compliance mindset often see regulations and compliance as a negative. Working in the regulatory affairs field in the medical device industry, we have been referred to as the police. And I have even heard the term sales prevention team used, which is not cool. Don't view compliance as a restrictive burden. Do consider compliance as a proactive approach to ensuring ethical and responsible business practices, building trust with stakeholders, protecting your company's reputation, and ultimately creating a positive environment for employees and customers. Fifth, include compliance, integrity, and values into the business. Develop a code of conduct outlining company values, ethical standards, and specific guidelines for compliance with relevant laws and internal policies. Prioritize adhering to laws and regulations, upholding ethical principles in all actions, and clearly defining and promoting a set of core values that guide decision making at all levels. Sixth, ensure that the compliance team guides and does not dictate. You should have a compliance team which includes a chief compliance officer, at the least, should have a compliance leader. The compliance leader needs to step in when required, but should try not to get too closely involved in operational issues. Ensure that the ops team knows what to do and let them figure out the how. And finally, number 7, too legit to quit. If you understand the reference, then you're my people. Basically, do everything that we just discussed. Legitimize the culture of compliance. Embed good behavior at all levels of the organization. Effectively communicate the value and relevance of compliance to every employee. Provide regular and meaningful training to help employees understand and incorporate their obligations. Develop a robust written policy. And finally, promote a set of values, behaviors, and attitudes that guide company stakeholders on how to adhere to policies, procedures, and regulations. To summarize, compliance is not a bad word. Non-compliance is expensive. Consider the examples that I gave with TD Bank, Volkswagen, Massimo, Meta. Reputation is everything. Again, think about the examples that I gave. Compliance is everyone's responsibility, and compliance fosters trust within an organization and among stakeholders. Thank you.
Shelly, thank you so much. Before we get started with the questions, for those of you joining us today that don't already have your IBDC designation, you can get your Modern Board Director candidate packaging and Modern Board operations knowledge all in one shot while also earning your internationally recognized International Board Director competency designation. Multiple ways to engage, multiple budget points. Hope to see you in the program. Let's get to some of our questions here, Shelly. Great presentation. How can a leader effectively show and demonstrate how increased compliance has a bottom line financial effect? This is an interesting question because we know that many leaders today are not just looking for the feel good or the values and the culture, but how do they prove the ROI of that particular culture of compliance?
Well, I think that there's many ways to measure a culture of compliance. You can use methods like employee surveys to gauge awareness and perception of compliance policies. You can monitor complaint reporting rates. You can assess training completion rates. You can conduct regular compliance audits and analyze the time it takes to identify compliance issues. I think all of those are ways that you can measure the return on investment.
Great point. I've seen some board directors actually use their competitors who receive fines as a way of saying that that company avoided these particular fines because they were in compliance. It's another way to look at it, I guess. Okay. Do you see compliance being affected with some of the current pushback on components of ESG? And if so, how?
Yeah, so there is no overarching legislation around the world, but there are individual country legislations. I see it a lot with, more impacted by the environmental um, requirements of ESG. I mean, you think about, like, I think that's where most of the focus is going to be placed.
Okay. All right. Let's see what else we have here. How do you recommend leaders and managers reward employees for not only compliance alignment in their role, but also being supportive of a culture of compliance?
Hmm.
This has
You
to do,
know,
I guess, with
I
the recognition side of this is quite an
yeah,
important question.
that's how I kind of see it. I mean, there are a lot of companies that do different kinds of reward programs in recognition for not just their, the compliance aspect, for also for, completing projects. I mean, there's lots of different kinds of rewards programs that you can
Mhm.
implement.
Okay. If you're brought onto a company to help course correct after an event of non-compliance, do you have any recommendations for turning the reputation around and changing the culture? Simple first steps.
Uh,
That's a tough role, I'll tell
yeah,
you. Yeah, tough
that's
role.
And I've actually faced that a couple of times. It takes a long time to build and build bridge among different departments and within the company to build that trust. I think it just takes time and open minds. And I think that, developing those relationships among the different departments of each company and within the people and just being an example as well. I think that holds a lot of water.
Yeah, I would add to that, having been involved in a few scenarios myself, in the coaching realm for this. Don't hide or sweep under the rug what actually happened. Use that as the catalyst to correct for the corrections. I've seen other routes taken where the admission of guilt has not been forthcoming. That I think is not
Yeah.
the right way to approach it. I think you have to admit the wrongdoing first, and then of course attack it. That becomes the rallying cry also of that not happening again in that organization.
Yeah, and that's something that like I've mentioned a lot. Like I said, I've had to face this in companies that and some of the companies that I've gone to and worked at, but I try to get people to like, okay, let's not just focus on, learn from the past. Let's not focus on it. Let's talk about a solution. How are we going to move forward? And what are we going to do to remedy that issue?
Great point. All right, let me touch on this another question here. I may take this question first, Shelley, and then add points to this if you'd like. The question is, with the somewhat loosening of DEI initiatives by several larger companies, what trends or changes are you seeing relative to corporate board composition? Certainly, I understand the listed entities have pending DEI requirements, but curious if you're seeing any changes in desired composition of boards yet. I personally am not. And look, looking back many years, it wasn't really the regulations or the push for DEI that were changing the composition of these boards. I, for one, and many other folks in the same industry that I'm in, we're seeing these changes of diversity included in boards because we understand that diversity of perspective leads to diversity of thought, which leads to elevated outcomes. So not necessarily as of yet. For the person asking the questions, we'll see this question. We'll see what happens in the short term. I know that we're seeing many of these changes in the U.S. currently. We'll see where this leads to, but from the trending, it's probably too early to tell based on the current administration. Anything to add to that, Shelley?
I think that you pretty much covered it.
Okay. All right. Another question. With a mindset of someone somewhere screwing up in the organization, how does a board how does a board balance fingers out principle and maintain constant compliance audit to make sure compliance is priority? So this really has to do with is a board getting the right information if they're sticking to the noses in, fingers out, but they're not seeing the day-to-day operations component maybe to that level. How are you ensuring this compliance? What type of reporting are you looking for?
That's a good question. I think that I want to think about that a little bit more before I give an answer. I want to be thoughtful about it.
Yeah,
So I'd
that's
like to.
That's fine. I can add to this that I'm typically looking for reporting, especially the reporting that rolls up to the board. For those of you that have been through the IBDC program, you'll see what we recommend from both board and committee reporting, that we're asking the right questions and measuring not only against the goals, but also the strategy areas of the organization. A strategy of the organization may be something that says to either enhance or look more deeply at the compliance components of the corporation or the organization to make sure they're being followed. I think there is a major reporting function to this to make sure that what you're expecting is being done in the organization. I had a mentor many years ago that said, inspect what you expect. And I think that's a great way to look at compliance. If you're requiring your organization to be compliant in certain areas, make sure that you're measuring those component areas as well. Shelly, I want to thank you so much. Great presentation, relevant, timely. Many concerns were covered I know, for leaders right now as we enter some uncertain times and changes. Well done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, too.
Bye now, everybody. Thanks for joining us.